I'm Stephanie Cole and I'm obsessed with making teas and then just forgetting about them.
I'm Monique Hammond and I'm obsessed with dangly earrings.
This is the Modern Adult Podcast where we explore the modern adult landscape and ask all the dumb questions about adulthood so you don't have to. We really have no dignity.
Coming up on this episode, we're talking about making mistakes and how you can truly learn a life lesson.
But first, wait! Mind your own damn business. Did you hate that?
I hated it.
So when is it okay to provide your opinion on something? We're getting super meta in this episode and discussing when can someone talk about something and when should someone shut their mouth. We might not have a podcast at the end of this, but we love a risky game, don't we, Monique?
Steph does. Okay. Yes, we love a risky game. I think there's lots of topics that we shy away from on the podcast because we're not sure if we should talk about them or not.
We're in like this new era of social justice, I would say. And I think I'm the first to admit that I've been a part of this, and I'm not saying that I regret ever trying to speak on issues because it's always been inherently from a good place. It's because you want someone to feel represented. And I know like a part of it has been me like obviously like rallying for like LGBT rights and whatnot. So that's been my main part of my journey with social justice stuff online and in the world in general. But it does get to a point where you're just speaking for the sake of speaking. And I wanted to discuss whether it's okay to be a part of a conversation that you're not too sure about.
I think the answer to that is sometimes and maybe. Like, I think so there are a few communities that I'm a part of that I feel comfortable speaking out on. Like, I feel really comfortable speaking against like sexual assault because that's something I've experienced, and I feel comfortable speaking on feminist issues like discrimination because that's something I've faced. I feel less comfortable talking about LGBT stuff because even though I am LGBT, I am not as part of that community. I feel really uncomfortable speaking about like issues about like race and, for example, like Indigenous issues in Australia because I have no idea about them. And even when I speak to people and I educate myself, I'm not really willing to be a spokesperson for that because it's me regurgitating something someone from that community has told me, and I don't feel the need to do that when there are other people better positioned to speak on those things. But on the flip side of that, I don't want to be in a room and not defend something I believe in just because I'm not part of that community. Does that make sense? So I don't want to be, say, like in like at a dinner with my all-white family and someone starts saying racist things about Indigenous people. Like, I'm going to speak up even though I'm not Indigenous and, you know, and defend that even though I'm not part of that group, and even though like as a wider conversation I wouldn't put my opinion out there. But if I'm the only one there, then you've got to speak up for what you believe in even if you're not part of that community. And I think that gets a bit tricky when you're speaking up to be an ally, but then sometimes speaking up to be an ally is actually a bit more frustrating for people than you realize.
I think the issue mainly is speaking on behalf of somebody else. Yeah. That's, I think, where the main issue is, and where a lot of people, and I think even us included, fall into that trap of wanting to do good, but then we start to erase the voices of the people who should be given the platform to speak on these issues. Like, I know we did a podcast recently about men and their reactions to feminism, and we mainly went at it from obviously our own lived experiences and from obviously like me and Monique are very white, so we can only speak on our own lived experiences. And I know, and it was intentional on us not to speak on women's issues to do with Black women and trans women. And I think that's definitely where more conversation needs to be had, but it's not my place to be having those conversations.
Yeah.
I can only give my support and my love, and hopefully one day I would love to have someone on this podcast to kind of utilize the platform that we're creating to share their voice and to share their stories, but it's not my place to be talking about those stories. And so I'm not going to speak on those stories when I'm not informed about any of that.
Yeah, exactly. So, and just because we're not speaking on something doesn't mean we don't have opinions about it as well.
Yeah,
I guess.
Exactly.
We would never, do that. I think also Steph and I are both in the film industry, and I know that especially for like the film industry in Western Australia, there's a huge shift in, I guess, away from collaboration with people in those marginalized groups or consultation with them to them representing their own stories. And like, I think in the film industry, there's now a move to like empower people to tell their own stories rather than telling someone's stories for them, So for example, like cultural and linguistically diverse backgrounds, they should be able to, but they should have the power to tell their own stories rather than me picking up a camera and recording them and them not having any voice in the final product.
Which is why you see a lot in film and television, there's a lot of tokenism, because people think that diversity is cool now, and that's just so I hate that term so much, but people don't put the effort into speaking and collaborating with the people who deserve to be telling their own stories, and that's why there's so much shit on television
and I don't think you can like get consultation, like you can't just get like a trans person to like sign off and be like, yeah, this has like trans issues and I as a trans person like tick that. You actually have to have someone like on the team who is actually a trans person who can speak to those lived experiences and to I guess drive the motivations behind the project. Otherwise you're just telling someone else's story, which I think you can tell anyone's story you want, but you can't just tell it without understanding the repercussions and how you're going to represent someone. And I just think that gets a bit lost.
Yeah.
And that's also why our podcast ends up being very like female focused, and I guess coming from a white middle class background, because that's what we are, and we don't want to speak to like, I guess, like situations we don't understand. Like
exactly. And I know any criticism that I've heard, I'm just going to talk about our podcast in general now. Yeah. Any criticism I've ever heard is mainly people criticizing, you didn't speak about this, you didn't talk about that. And I'm like, well, who am I to talk about those issues? Yeah. Like, I have my own opinions based on my own lived experiences. And even going back to the example about talking about men and feminism, I'm only speaking about it from my perspective. And if I got any criticism from men on that podcast, like I did, it wasn't that I was trying to erase your voice. You can talk about it as much as you want, but it was more us having an open conversation about it and what has impacted our lives.
Yeah.
And it's not about me like putting down somebody else. It's about me starting a conversation with someone who may be not privy to my lived experience, and me talking about my experience might have opened up a whole new world for them. And it could even open up a whole new world for me. Not that it really has, but if someone were to come to me and be like, hey, I listened to this, I didn't agree, but this is why I didn't agree, I'm willing to listen to that. And that's the conversations I'm trying to start, but I'm not going to start a conversation I have no experience with. And that's what I'm trying to kind of get at.
Oh, for sure. And I don't think enough people these days kind of own up to the fact that they don't kind of know what they're talking about. Like, there's been times when like, I've been out with friends and we're like debating politics, and they move on to something and I'm like, I have to be like, oh, well, fuck, I actually don't know anything about this. So I'm going to like bow out of the conversation because like I can't speak to Trump's motivations to putting up the wall because I haven't fucking looked into it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of people who kind of don't really know when to stop talking and when to just say, actually, like, I haven't looked into that. And like, that's the thing for our podcast. Like, we always try and look into what we're talking about. We don't really talk that much like off the cuff about things. Like we plan what we're going to talk about. Yeah, I don't know. I just think people need to kind of think about why they're saying what they're saying and whether or not they actually have all the information they need, or whether they could maybe just take a step back for a bit and do more than just Google the title of the topic.
Do you believe political correctness is a bad thing?
No, my God, I really don't. I think that it was like a shift to political correctness, but now I think it's kind of shifting back to like fuck political correctness. And I don't see, there's so many things that people are like, oh, that's just politically correct. And I don't think not calling, I just think there's so many things that people are like, oh, that's excessive political correctness. And I'm like, that's just not being a cunt to like random communities. Like, it's like
someone being like, oh, that's so gay. And I'm like,
exactly.
Don't fucking say that to me.
That's not like politically correctness. Like, I'm not infringing on your freedom to like say harmful things. Like, just don't be a cunt to certain people is kind of the thing. It's like, I don't want to use any like slurs. Like, I don't want to say anything that I wouldn't like say, but okay. For example, the word gypped. I recently found out that that's like having a go at gypsies, like to say that like, you know, gypsies will rip you off. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. And now I've stopped using the word because like, I don't want to perpetuate that stereotype. And I don't think that's being overly PC. I just think that's not perpetuating a stereotype that has no need to be perpetuated, you know?
I really don't understand the argument when people are like, everyone is just so PC nowadays, but like, why does it matter? Just pick a different word. Like,
exactly. Just pick it's all words, just like.
And if I can go out of my way, I'm not even really going out of my way to make someone else feel more comfortable in a room, then I'm going to do that. It's not me having to filter myself. Like, I shouldn't be saying those things if they're hurtful to someone anyway.
And I just think like it costs you fucking nothing to not say harmful things.
Yeah.
Like, it has, like, to just remove a couple of words from your vocabulary, it costs you nothing.
You don't know what your words do to another person. And it's easy for me to just sit here and be like, oh, like, you're just being overly politically correct. Like, it's just so stupid. It's not going to do anything. But you don't know what that other person has lived through. And for me to hear, I don't know, like homophobic slurs, for example, you don't know what I've been through. You don't know what those words can do to me personally and what I have lived with growing up. And you don't know what those words can do. They can send me back to a certain place. And that's, if someone, I don't understand why people
just need to say that shit.
Yeah.
It's just like, don't.
It's just stupid.
I've got a friend. He's actually not my friend. I actually dislike him quite a bit, but he's part of my, like one of my extended friend groups, and he says the N-word all the time.
What?
And I hate hearing him say that.
Yeah.
And so like, I've never said to him like, oh my God, don't say that. Like, I wish I could, but when I'm in his house, like I don't. So I've just like, I don't go to his house. He's not allowed in my house. Like, he doesn't know that.
Yeah.
He will never be invited back to my home.
Yeah.
And like, if he's going somewhere, I'm probably not going to be there because I don't feel like he needs to say that word. And I think he says it to piss me off because he knows that it upsets me, you know? So like, why would I put myself? And it's just like, that person knows zero black people. Yeah. And you know what? But that person is in a profession where he should not be. So yeah, I don't know. It's just like, it's not PC to not want people to say those things that are going to like actively harm people. Like, just don't be a cunt. Like, fuck's sake. Like, that's all it comes down to. And if you're like, no, not saying the N-word infringes on my personal rights, you're a cunt. Just so you know. Fuck this.
So kind of continuing on from the mind your own business segment, this kind of leads into it. I want to talk about making mistakes and learning from them, whether it's social, mental, or with relationships or in the workplace. Making mistakes can be really scary, and it's something I avoid like the plague, but I also crave, because I've spoken on this podcast before about the kind of my journey of growing and how failure is fundamental in it. But I want to talk about how you can actually learn from a mistake.
Mistakes are great, but they're also terrible. I feel like I learn so much more from my mistakes than like from what I achieve. Like there's so many things I've learned from going, well, I'm never going to do that again.
Yeah.
And like, I think that's so valuable. And those lessons, I think, stick with you more than like it working, you know?
I did want to talk about like, it's one thing to make a mistake and it's another to actually learn from that mistake.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And I actually was like at a presentation earlier this week and it was a bunch of minors and this guy was giving a talk on emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And the whole presentation was on being emotionally intelligent as a leader. So this guy was in a leadership role and he had a person in his team who kept making a mistake, and he could give him all the written warnings in the world, but it made no difference until one day he went up to him and he was like, you know what? I'm not going to write you up, but I just want to let you know that I'm disappointed in you. And that was really interesting because it made me think of the word, or why I think that word is so impactful. And I think it's because it infers a level of care and investment somebody's put into you.
Yeah.
So if someone was to say that to me, it would make me stop and be like, oh shit, they've really invested in me and why aren't I investing back?
Right.
So that was really interesting language. And I think language more than anything has more of a power to create change rather than any kind of physical thing like a written warning. Like that's going to make me stop and it's going to make me think, but is it really going to help me change anything in my life? And I
think that's sort of realizing the impact that the mistake has made. Like you can make a million mistakes and go, oh, whoopsie, but like you should actually think about like, okay, I've done this and it affects the people around me for these reasons.
Yes.
And what am I going to do to learn and grow from this?
Because I think getting a written warning, it's like, okay, I've screwed up, but it hasn't really affected anyone else.
Say, if someone gave me a written warning, I would still freak the fuck out.
I know.
But I understand that some other people, they're just like, meh. And I'm like,
but I wouldn't give
to be that cavalier about life.
I suppose everybody reacts to things differently. And the point of that presentation in particular was that having the kind of emotional intelligence to work out how people operate differently and how you need to respond to that to help them learn and grow.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to learn, especially if you're trying to improve yourself and work on yourself, is to work out how you in particular learn from lessons. And I'm not saying like you need to go out and like disappoint a bunch of people to learn some lessons. I think it's just important to be very self-aware. So I think there's a lot of debate around whether you can truly learn a lesson through a book. Or if you have to experience it. And I kind of wanted to pick your brain.
Think, yes, I think you can learn things from a book, but I don't think it really sticks until you actually like do it and you see the results. And like books are great. They're great theory, and especially in filmmaking, there's lots of books written on the topic. And I've read lots of books on the topic, but I still think the things that I understand best how to do are from experience. Like, so I understand that, like, so for example, like you shouldn't set the call time too early because everyone will get bored and there won't be enough to do and you'll end up paying your crew way more than you should have to. And that's something I know, but I still fucked that up. And then when I set the call time too early, everyone was there early, everyone was ready early, and everyone's standing around not being able to do anything. Like that taught me more than a reading and a book ever could have, you know.
But that was your own insecurity around that. You were worried that everything wouldn't be done. So you needed to learn that to feel secure. And I needed
to learn to trust my team. And,
exactly.
You know, and I did that. And like, that's not something I could have read in the book, you know.
But in that instance, I think there wasn't much to lose because...
No. But there have been times when like there are more, I guess, high stakes things, like not just with work, but like in relationships. There are things you can do in a relationship and you might not realize, but they're actually like putting a relationship in like quite bad jeopardy, but
yes.
you don't know that until you've done it and then you made a mistake and you have to be like, fuck, I'll never do that again.
And I think like if you talk to anyone who's been in like serious relationships, you'll hear that they learned something from each and every one of them.
Oh, yeah.
And that's helped them to be in a good place with their current relationship because they know, one, what they don't want in a relationship, and two, like that actions have consequences, and when you do something and you say something, it can have consequences, and you need to be mindful and you need to be respectful of your partner.
Oh, for sure.
And that goes for in a workplace as well, or with friendships.
You can't make the same mistake over and over again. I think I remember once like a tutor told me, I was like kept making mistake after mistake after mistake. And I was like, oh my God, like you're going to fucking hate me. You're going to think I'm an idiot. She's like, no, I think it's fine because each time you make a mistake, you're making a different mistake. Mm. So I wasn't making the same mistake over and over again. I was like fixing that mistake and then doing something else. And
it was just unfortunate in that situation. Exactly. You had lots of mistakes to be made.
Exactly. Yes. So I was making an original mistake every time. And I think that really helped. It's like, I don't care how many mistakes I make as long as I don't make the same mistake twice. Like when I'm at work and my boss is like, oh, don't do this. I'm like, okay, well, now I know I shouldn't do that. That's the last time I'm going to do it, you know? And I still get corrected on things, but at least I'm not getting corrected on the same thing over and over again. That becomes super tedious.
And I think there's a massive difference between like making mistakes because you're not prepared and making mistakes because you really don't know something, if that makes sense. Like the way I think you can learn and grow from mistakes is to have a vision of what you're trying to achieve at the end of it. So with, I don't know, I'm just going to use this podcast for an example. I'm not a great public speaker. I am not the best about talking or having like in-depth conversations about like new topics to me. I really have to like buckle down and research. And I'm going to always say things that I may not know is a mistake, or I'm not going to be able to communicate properly. But the more I do it, the more I learn and I grow from it, and I won't make the same mistake.
Yeah, you know? I definitely think that's been a learning experience on this podcast. Like I think if we listen to our earlier episodes, we're like, ugh. And then now we're like, oh, okay, we wouldn't frame it like that or put that perspective in, you know?
And so I know from like 10 episodes from now, we're going to be looking at this one and being like, oh, what the fuck were we talking about? Yeah. Like we're the worst.
Yeah.
So sorry you have to listen to us. But I hope that we kind of all grow together because both me and Monique are learning, and this is a learning experience for us, and which is why we're kind of doing it, because it forces us to think about things and evaluate things in our life that we may not ever evaluate, or we would evaluate too late. So it's kind of forcing us to be better humans, and I hope
think deeply about a topic that
yeah,
and hopefully to get you guys to think deeply about it too, or at least like examine your like examine your motivations around some things. Like for example, we were talking about earlier, like maybe think about a time when you should have spoken up that you didn't, or a time when you did speak up that you shouldn't have, and you know, just think about it.
And you know, you don't have to listen to us without anything. Like my advice is bullshit. Don't listen to me.
Yeah, it really
is. So and these are just conversations, and I think a lot of people make the mistake of taking things as fact. We're human, you're human, and we're always going to learn from our mistakes. We're going to be making mistakes constantly, and it's not that we're bad people or you're a bad person for doing something. Is that you just might not have the awareness or mindfulness to not do those things. So we're all learning, we're all growing, and hopefully we can be just amazing human beings soon.
So that's it for today's episode. You've been listening to Modern Adult. If you'd like to stay in contact or share your thoughts about the episode, head to our Facebook page, Modern Adult Podcast.
If you like what you hear, please leave a review on iTunes and spread the word. It would be a mistake not to.